The briefcase was the one place I was never allowed to touch. For over 4 decades of marriage, I respected that boundary, even though every instinct in me told me that secrets lived inside. But one late evening, as the clock ticked past midnight and the silence in the house pressed down like a heavy quilt, I could no longer resist. My hands trembled as I unbuckled the worn leather straps, half terrified of what I might discover. Lawrence Harris, my husband of over 40 years, had always been meticulous about appearances. He was the man who pressed his shirts until not a wrinkle dared show, the man who polished his shoes every Saturday morning, the man who carried that black leather briefcase everywhere, even after retiring from the world of finance. Old habits. He would shrug whenever I asked why he still needed it. But there was something in the way his eyes hardened, a flicker of warning, that told me I should never look inside. That night, I did, and the discovery shattered the foundation of my life. Nestled between folded papers and a silver pen was a small box. My breath caught in my throat. I opened it with the caution of a woman who already knew she was standing on the edge of betrayal. Inside were several condoms. Not dusty, forgotten relics of a younger man's past, but new, shiny, sealed, damning. My heart pounded so hard I feared it would wake him from his sleep down the hall. What for? For years, Lawrence had claimed age had dulled his desires, that intimacy was no longer his priority. He dismissed my concerns with a tired smile, telling me to focus on my salon, on my clients, on our grown son, Isaac. But here, in my hands, was proof that his words had been nothing but a careful lie. Condoms did not buy themselves, and they were not purchased for a woman like me, a 63-year-old wife who had long accepted the quiet absence of passion. I sat back on the edge of the bed, the box trembling in my hand. My first reaction was disbelief, then a rush of anger so sharp it burned my throat. For years I had trusted Lawrence with everything: our finances, our home, even my salon's business dealings. I had built Harris Styles, my chain of salons, with my own 2 hands, yet I had always let him manage the contracts, the accountants, the paperwork. Now I realized the man I had trusted most might be planning more than an affair. He might be preparing to rob me of everything I had created. I placed the box back in the briefcase, arranging it as carefully as I had found it, my fingers steady despite the storm inside me. Then I closed the straps, restored the leather case to its sacred corner, and slipped back beneath the covers. But sleep never came. I lay there, listening to Lawrence's steady breathing, wondering how long he had been laughing behind my back. By dawn, I was sitting at the vanity in my salon, combing through memories instead of hair. Every detail of the night replayed in my mind. The shine of the foil packets, the heavy smell of leather, the sickening realization that I was living with a stranger. I thought of Isaac, my only son, 35 years old and proud of his career as fire chief. I thought of Tiffany, his 32-year-old wife, who greeted me with bright smiles that now seemed rehearsed. My gut whispered a possibility so vile I dared not name it out loud, that she was the one sharing my husband's bed. The thought alone made me nauseous, yet the pieces fit too perfectly. The late-night calls, the sudden trips, the perfume lingering on Lawrence's clothes. Tiffany's distance from Isaac, her constant excuses, her eyes darting away when family dinners grew tense. I had dismissed them as quirks of a young woman adjusting to marriage. Now I saw them for what they were, cracks in the facade of my family. I knew I could not confront Lawrence without evidence. Men like him, confident, calculating, could turn accusations back on you in an instant. I needed proof, undeniable proof, before I risked shattering the fragile life I still clung to. My grandmother used to say, "A woman's intuition is older than any book, but paper and ink are what make men believe." I finally understood her wisdom. As I styled a client's hair that morning, smiling and nodding as if nothing in my life had changed, my mind was elsewhere. I thought of my next steps. If Lawrence was capable of betrayal in the bedroom, he was capable of betrayal in the boardroom. My salon chain, worth over $3 million, was more than a business. It was my legacy, my independence, my identity. I could not let it slip into the greedy hands of a husband who no longer saw me as a partner, or a daughter-in-law who saw me as nothing but an obstacle. When evening fell, I returned home to the same quiet house, the same steady man who kissed my cheek as if he had not already betrayed me. But something inside me had changed. I was no longer the trusting wife who turned a blind eye. I was a woman preparing for war, and the battlefield would be my own home. The morning after I opened the forbidden briefcase, I walked into my kitchen and felt as though every familiar detail had turned foreign. The oak cabinets, the ticking wall clock, even the coffee maker that hissed as it brewed all of it, seemed to belong to another woman's life. I sat with my cup, hands wrapped tightly around the porcelain, staring at Lawrence across the table. He flipped through the financial section of the newspaper as if nothing had changed, as if the night before had not cracked our marriage down the middle. "Another long day ahead," he muttered, folding the paper neatly. He avoided my eyes. That was not unusual. Lawrence had grown skilled at offering just enough attention to keep me silent, but today I felt the weight of what I knew pressing between us like a wall. I forced a smile. "Of course. Don't work too hard." My voice came out steady, though my heart was drumming like a trapped bird. He kissed the top of my head and left with his briefcase in hand. I watched the door close, feeling both relief and rage. Relief that he was gone, rage that he still had the audacity to pretend. At the salon that day, my scissors clicked rhythmically as I trimmed layers from Mrs. Perry's silver hair. The shop was alive with chatter, blow dryers humming, women swapping stories about children, husbands, and grandchildren. But I could not focus. My mind circled the image of that small box in Lawrence's case, the foil packets shining like warning bells. "Evelyn, are you all right?" Mrs. Perry asked, peering at me in the mirror. I nodded quickly. "Just a little tired." She studied me but said no more. In small towns, women like me learned early how to wear a mask. Smile, nod, keep moving. No one needed to know when your world was breaking apart. That evening, as I swept the salon floor, my phone buzzed. A text from Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. "Can we reschedule Sunday dinner? Isaac's shifts are crazy, and I'm overwhelmed with work." I read it twice, my stomach tightening. Overwhelmed with work? She hadn't held a steady contract in months, and Sunday dinners were sacred. Isaac insisted on them even when his firehouse schedule left him bone-tired. If she wanted to skip, it was not because of work, it was because of something else. I thought of Tiffany's smiles, too sweet, too careful. The way her perfume sometimes lingered in my hallway even after she had supposedly gone straight home. My intuition screamed the truth I dreaded. She was the reason Lawrence needed condoms. That night, I could not sleep. I sat at my vanity, staring into the mirror. The woman who gazed back at me had tired eyes and hair threaded with gray, but she also had fire. I whispered to my reflection, "You deserve the truth, whatever it costs." The next morning, I dialed a number I had not called in years. Gabriel Perry, a longtime friend and one of the few men I trusted. He had once helped me negotiate a lease when I was opening my second salon, and I knew he kept contacts in the city. "Evelyn," he said warmly, "it's been too long. How's the Empire of Style?" I managed a laugh, still standing. "But I need your help with something delicate." When I told him enough to hint at betrayal, his voice dropped. "I know someone, discreet, reliable, a private investigator. Do you want his number?" I hesitated, staring at the framed photo of my wedding day on the mantel. Lawrence had been handsome then, with ambition in his eyes. I remembered believing he would protect me. Now I knew better. "Yes," I said firmly. "Send me the number." That evening, Lawrence came home later than usual, his tie loosened, his cheeks flushed with the faint scent of cologne that was not mine. I set his dinner on the table, my smile polite, my heart stone cold. "How was your day?" he asked. "Busy," I replied smoothly. "Lots of new clients." He nodded, distracted, already reaching for his phone. I watched his thumbs move quickly across the screen before he set it face down. My suspicion hardened into certainty. Later, as I washed the dishes, my phone buzzed again. A text from the investigator Gabriel had promised. "Mrs. Harris, I understand you need clarity. I can start tomorrow. Meet me at the cafe at noon." I wiped my wet hands on a towel, my pulse racing. The moment had come. No more blind trust. No more pretending. I would get the truth no matter how much it burned. And deep inside, I already knew the truth would burn hotter than fire. The cafe where I agreed to meet the investigator was a quiet place tucked away near the edge of town, the kind of spot where no one asked questions, and the aroma of coffee beans covered every whispered conversation. I arrived early, settling into a corner booth with my hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. The steam rose in soft spirals, but it did nothing to steady my nerves. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. At exactly noon, a stocky man with thoughtful eyes and a weathered blue shirt approached my table. "Mrs. Harris?" he asked in a voice that carried both caution and certainty. "Yes," I replied, forcing my tone to remain calm. He slid into the booth. "My name is Wayne Martin. Gabriel told me you needed help." He didn't waste time with small talk, and I appreciated that. He pulled out a small notepad. "Tell me what you know so far." I recounted the forbidden briefcase, the condoms, the late nights, the perfume that didn't belong to me. Each word felt like pulling teeth, painful but necessary. Wayne listened without interruption, jotting down occasional notes. When I finished, he leaned back. "You suspect another woman. Do you have anyone specific in mind?" The words stuck in my throat. Admitting it out loud felt like cutting my heart open. "Yes, my daughter-in-law, Tiffany." Wayne's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. "That's serious. If you're right, it will devastate your son." "I know," I whispered. "But I need the truth. I can't live with suspicion." He nodded. "Then I'll begin surveillance tonight. Discreet photos, recordings if possible. I'll send you updates as I get them. You may not like what I find." "I don't need to like it," I said. "I just need to know." That night I went home to Lawrence sitting comfortably in his chair, scrolling his phone with a faint smile tugging at his lips. My stomach churned. He looked up briefly and asked about my day. I answered in clipped words, praying he didn't notice my shaking hands. He didn't. He was too busy checking his messages. The first update came 2 days later. My phone buzzed while I was mixing color for a client at the salon. I glanced down and froze. A photo filled the screen. Lawrence and Tiffany, stepping out of a quiet restaurant, her hand on his arm, their bodies angled toward each other in a way no father-in-law and daughter-in-law should ever stand. My scissors nearly slipped from my hand. I excused myself to the back room, claiming I needed more supplies. With trembling fingers, I scrolled through the images Wayne had sent. There was Lawrence holding the door for Tiffany, Lawrence brushing a strand of hair from her face, Lawrence leaning close as she laughed at something he whispered. My heart pounded in my chest. Proof. Ugly, undeniable proof. That night, Wayne called me directly. His voice was calm, but the weight of his words crushed me. They spent 3 hours together at that restaurant. Afterward, they drove to a hotel on the west side. I followed. They checked in under different names. They stayed the night. I sank onto the floor of my bedroom, clutching the phone. "My God," I breathed. "I'll keep watching," Wayne said gently. "Do you want me to continue?" "Yes," I whispered, my throat raw. "Don't stop. I need every detail." The following days were a blur. Clients came and went from my salon, chatting about grandchildren and vacations while I nodded on autopilot. But inside, I was crumbling. Every buzz of my phone brought more evidence. Grainy photos of Lawrence and Tiffany laughing in parking lots, slipping into the same hotel room, sharing meals that looked like dates. Then one night, Wayne sent me a video. I sat alone at the kitchen table, lights dim, and pressed play. The screen showed Lawrence and Tiffany in the corner of a hotel restaurant. Candles flickered between them. Lawrence raised his glass, his eyes soft, almost tender. Tiffany leaned forward, her hand brushing his, her lips curved in a smile I had once believed she saved for my son. The sound of Lawrence's laughter filled the clip, a laugh I had not heard in years. It wasn't the tired chuckle he gave me at the end of long days. It was younger, lighter, filled with joy. A joy stolen from me and stolen from Isaac. I replayed the video until my tears blurred the image. This was no fling. This was a performance of love. A betrayal deeper than anything I had imagined. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. My marriage of over 40 years was dead. My son's marriage was a lie. My business, my legacy, was in the crosshairs of two people who had mocked me in secret. I wiped my face and whispered to the empty room, "Enough." The ugly truth was out, and now it was my turn to decide what came next. The days that followed felt like living in a slow-motion nightmare. Every time Lawrence smiled across the dinner table, every time Tiffany kissed my cheek at family gatherings, I heard the echo of their laughter from that hotel video. I moved through my routine like an actress trapped in a bad play, smiling, nodding, pretending, while the script of betrayal scrolled endlessly in my head. But the night that changed everything came when Lawrence made a mistake, a small one, but enough. He had gone to bed earlier than usual, complaining of a headache. I followed quietly, slipping into the room after he fell asleep. His briefcase sat at the foot of the bed, the brass locks gleaming faintly in the lamplight. My heart raced as I crouched beside it. I didn't need to open it this time. His phone, carelessly tucked halfway into the outer pocket, lit up with a new message. I shouldn't have touched it. I knew that. But after 40 years of loyalty, I told myself I had earned the right to see the truth. I slid the phone free and tapped the screen. The message preview burned into me. "Dad, hurry up with the papers. I want that whole salon chain under our name before the end of the month." Dad. My daughter-in-law had the audacity to call him that in a message plotting theft. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I forced myself to breathe, then opened the full thread. Tiffany's words were sharp, greedy. She spoke of contracts, of contacts at a notary office, of transferring ownership quietly. She mocked me, calling me the old woman, saying I was too distracted with clients and hair dye to notice. And Lawrence, my husband, the man I once trusted more than anyone, replied with chilling confidence, "Don't worry. Evelyn believes in me completely. Leave it to me. The papers will be ready soon." I slipped the phone back before my rage betrayed me. I lay beside him, listening to his steady breathing, knowing that the man snoring peacefully was preparing to strip me of everything. Not just love, not just loyalty, my entire life's work. The next morning, I confronted my reflection instead of him. I stood at my vanity, staring into the mirror as sunlight streamed through the curtains. My grandmother's words came back. "A woman's silence can be a weapon sharper than any blade." I understood now. If I screamed, if I accused, Lawrence would twist my words, call me paranoid, maybe even try to have me declared unfit. But if I stayed silent and gathered evidence, I could cut deeper than his lies ever could. At the salon, scissors in hand, I moved like a woman possessed. My clients chatted about their grandchildren and the weather, but I barely heard them. Behind every word, I saw Tiffany's smirk, Lawrence's cold replies. When Betty Martin came in for her weekly trim, she studied me with sharp eyes. "Evelyn, you're quiet today. Something wrong?" I smiled faintly. "Just tired." She accepted the answer, but I saw the suspicion linger in her gaze. Betty had lived long enough to recognize the look of a woman plotting something. That evening, Wayne called with another update. His voice carried the weight of bad news. They met at a lawyer's office this afternoon. I took photos. Tiffany was with him. From what I overheard, they're pushing to draft transfer documents. My hand clenched around the phone. "Do you have proof?" "Yes," Wayne replied. "I'll send the files tonight." Minutes later, my inbox filled with images. Lawrence and Tiffany leaving the office, her arm brushing his briefcase heavy in hand. A second shot showed them standing outside a hotel, their bodies angled close, and then the worst, an audio snippet. I pressed play, my breath caught. Tiffany's voice rang out, impatient and cold. "Dad, the sooner you sign those contracts, the sooner we can get rid of her." "Rid of me." Lawrence's laugh followed, smooth and confident. "Relax. She trusts me too much. She'll never see it coming." I sat frozen in the kitchen, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. I felt no tears this time, only a cold, burning rage that steadied my hands. They thought I was blind. They thought age had made me weak, distracted, too soft to notice betrayal blooming right under my roof. They were wrong. I saved every file, printed every photo, and tucked them into a thick envelope hidden beneath family albums. The irony was sharp, those albums filled with smiling faces, birthday candles, anniversaries, lies captured in glossy paper. Now they would cover the truth I intended to unleash. As I sealed the envelope, my lips curved into the faintest smile. They wanted to poison my future with their promises, but they had forgotten one thing. I knew how to set traps, too. And soon, my house would become their undoing. I had spent my whole life creating beauty, layering color, smoothing curls, giving women the confidence to walk into the world with their heads high. But now I found myself planning something ugly, something sharp-edged and vengeful. Strange how betrayal transforms you. It takes the same steady hands that once cut hair with precision and teaches them how to cut deeper. The forbidden briefcase returned to my thoughts every night, taunting me from its corner. I knew the condoms were still there, proof of Lawrence's hidden life. One evening, while he showered, I moved silently across the bedroom floor and opened the case once more. The box was unchanged, the foil packets still gleaming under the lamplight. I stared at them with a mix of revulsion and cold determination. I had already spoken with a retired nurse from my salon, a woman who specialized in natural remedies. Over cups of tea, I explained I needed something that could irritate the skin without leaving permanent harm. She raised a brow but said nothing. Perhaps she guessed the truth. Perhaps she too had known the sting of betrayal. A few days later, she gave me a small vial of oil mixed with ground pepper and plant extracts, whispering, "It burns like fire, but it won't scar." That night, my plan solidified. I retrieved a sterile syringe I kept from an old first aid kit. With painstaking care, I pierced the tip of each condom packet and injected a few drops of the fiery mixture. My hands did not shake. Decades of steady cutting, dyeing, and weaving had trained them to precision. When I finished, I sealed each foil carefully, pressing the edges back together until no sign of tampering showed. I returned the box to its hiding place, locking the briefcase with the same reverence as before. Lawrence would never notice. And Tiffany, greedy Tiffany, would discover soon enough what it meant to play with fire. Still, one trap was not enough. I needed the stage, the spotlight. Their shame had to be public, undeniable, unforgettable. For that, I turned to fire, though not the kind that destroys. In the quiet of the kitchen, I set about preparing my second act. From the pantry, I pulled an old skillet, a bottle of cooking oil, and a coil of string. I tied the string to the stove's igniter and looped it through the window toward a heavy ceramic pot I placed outside. When pulled, the igniter would spark, the oil would smoke, and thick black clouds would billow from the open window. Not a raging blaze, but enough to send neighbors running, enough to summon the fire department. I tested it once, just enough to see the smoke curl upward like a dark warning. Then I snuffed it out quickly, wiping every trace. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from anticipation. The following days passed in slow tension. Lawrence moved through the house with smug ease, leaving early, returning late, always carrying that damned briefcase. Tiffany texted me cheerfully about rescheduling dinners, her words dripping with practiced sweetness. And Isaac, my poor son, remained blind, caught between long shifts at the firehouse and the illusion of a faithful wife. I told no one of my plan. Secrets had become the air we breathed in this family. Mine was simply the sharpest. Yet as I worked at the salon, trimming bangs and curling locks, I found myself imagining the moment, Lawrence and Tiffany, thinking themselves clever, cornered by the very walls they had defiled. Naked, exposed, their bodies betraying them as surely as their lies had betrayed me. One evening, while Lawrence snored in his chair, I slipped quietly into the bedroom. His car keys rested on the nightstand, gleaming under the lamp. I picked them up, walked to the garage, and opened the glove box. There it was, the box of condoms he thought was safely hidden. My trap was already waiting inside, silent, invisible, unstoppable. I returned the keys to their place and sat on the edge of the bed, watching him sleep. The man I had once loved enough to build an empire beside now looked like a stranger, soft and vulnerable in slumber. I felt no tenderness, only resolve. The night before I planned to strike, I rehearsed everything in my mind. I would tell him I had to travel for business, an overnight contract negotiation. He would relax, believing he was free to invite Tiffany into my home. The oil trap would be ready, the neighbors watchful, the fire department only a call away. And when the smoke rose and the house filled with shouts, Lawrence and Tiffany would have no place to hide. I closed my eyes, whispering a prayer not for forgiveness, but for strength. I was not the same woman who had once accepted silence and lies. I was Evelyn Harris, and I was about to remind them both that I still held the scissors. The morning of my plan arrived with deceptive calm. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, the same way it had for years, but I felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I moved about the kitchen, preparing breakfast. My movements steady, though my mind raced with every detail I had memorized. Lawrence sipped his coffee, humming softly, oblivious to the storm that was waiting for him. "I have to travel today," I said casually, sliding a plate of eggs in front of him. "A supplier is opening a new line of products. I'll probably be gone until late tonight." His eyes brightened ever so slightly. Relief, not concern. "That's good," he said with a grin that barely touched his lips. "You deserve a little change of scenery." I nodded, hiding my disgust. He wanted me gone, and I was giving him exactly what he craved. By mid-morning, my suitcase was packed, a believable disguise. I walked across the street to Betty Martin's house, asking if I could sit with her for a few hours. She welcomed me in, her sharp eyes flickering with curiosity but no questions. I settled near her front window, the view of my own house clear and perfect. From here, I would watch the stage I had set. Hours crept by. Around 10, a taxi pulled up in front of my home. Tiffany stepped out, wearing a pale dress and oversized sunglasses. She glanced up and down the street, then hurried inside when Lawrence opened the door. My grip tightened around my coffee cup, my pulse pounded, but I stayed still. Inside, my hidden recorder caught the sound of laughter, the clinking of glasses. I slipped on my headphones and listened, my stomach twisting as Tiffany's voice rang out. "Finally, the old woman's gone. We don't have to sneak around anymore." Lawrence chuckled. "This house should have been ours from the start." I pulled the string tied to the stove's igniter. A spark, a hiss. Within seconds, dark smoke curled from the kitchen window, rising in heavy waves. Betty gasped. "Evelyn, your house!" she cried, clutching my arm. "It's just a small accident," I murmured, my voice steady. "Help will come soon." Outside, neighbors poured into their yards, pointing at the smoke, shouting. Someone yelled, "Call the fire department!" Phones lit up. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Through my headphones, the chaos inside shifted. Tiffany's laughter turned into shrill panic. "Lawrence, what's happening? My skin, it burns. It's itching everywhere." "Shut up!" Lawrence barked. "Get to the bathroom, quick!" But no amount of water could soothe what I had hidden in those foil packets. I imagined them clawing at themselves, frantic, humiliated. When the smoke thickened, the bedroom door burst open. Lawrence and Tiffany stumbled out of the house, stripped bare, their skin flushed red, their hands scratching furiously. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. Another laughed in disbelief. "Dear Lord," Betty whispered beside me, hand covering her mouth. Neighbors lifted their phones, recording the scene. Lawrence shouted curses, trying to cover himself with trembling hands. Tiffany sobbed, her hair a tangled mess, her face twisted with shame. "It burns! Make it stop!" she wailed. And then, the worst blow of all, the fire truck screeched to a halt. Isaac leapt from the driver's seat, his fire chief uniform pressed and proud. "My son." He charged toward the house with his team, barking orders, but the moment his eyes landed on the scene, he froze. His father and his wife, naked, clawing at themselves like desperate animals in front of half the neighborhood. A silence heavier than smoke fell over the yard. Isaac's face drained of color. One of his men muttered, "Oh my God." Another stifled a laugh until Isaac roared, "Silence!" His voice cracked with fury and heartbreak. Lawrence reached toward him, voice raw. "Son, get everyone inside. Don't let them see us." But it was far too late. The crowd was already buzzing, whispering, pointing. "The husband and the daughter-in-law," someone muttered. "Unbelievable." Betty raised her phone, recording every detail. Her eyes flicked to me. I met her gaze. neither denying nor confirming. Isaac's men extinguished the small fire within minutes, but the damage was done. When the medics wrapped sheets around Lawrence and Tiffany, the neighbors jeered. Phones stayed high, cameras rolling. Their humiliation was complete. From across the street, I watched with a calmness that surprised me. My traps had sprung, my enemies were undone. But as Isaac stood in the yard, shoulders heavy, his eyes glassy, my heart ached. My revenge had come at a price. My son's world had collapsed alongside mine. Still, there was no turning back. The ambulance doors slammed shut, carrying Lawrence and Tiffany away, their bodies wrapped in white sheets like guilty phantoms. The siren wailed down the street, but the echoes of shame lingered long after the vehicle disappeared. Neighbors huddled in small groups, their voices hushed yet sharp, their phones still glowing with videos of the spectacle. I stood behind Betty Martin's curtains, my hands clenched, my heart heavy with both triumph and sorrow. "Everyone saw," Betty whispered, lowering her phone at last. Her eyes searched my face. "You knew something, didn't you, Evelyn?" I gave her a faint smile. Sometimes a woman just knows when her life is being stolen. She nodded, though her gaze softened with pity. I didn't need pity. I needed strength. Across the street, Isaac stood motionless, his helmet dangling from one hand, his shoulders slumped under a weight heavier than any fire hose. His men moved awkwardly around him, avoiding his eyes. They had seen too much more than any son should ever witness. I wanted to rush to him, to tell him I was sorry he had to see his wife and his father exposed like that, but the words caught in my throat. I stayed hidden, letting him carry his pain in silence. By evening, the scandal had already spread beyond the neighborhood. Betty showed me her phone, social media flooded with shaky clips of Lawrence and Tiffany stumbling out of my house, red-faced, clawing at their burning skin. The captions were merciless. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law? Unbelievable. The Harris shame. Every repost, every comment was another nail in the coffin of their reputation, exactly as I had intended. Still, I could not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. My house was intact, but my family was not. I stared at the envelope of evidence tucked under the drawer, photos, audio files, everything I had gathered. Proof that what the world saw was no accident, but a pattern of betrayal and theft. The next morning I dressed carefully in a navy blouse and pearl earrings. My reflection in the mirror looked calm, but my eyes carried the weight of decades. I walked to the hospital with deliberate steps, the envelope tucked into my purse. The hallway was filled with whispers as I arrived. Even here, the scandal had traveled faster than the ambulance. A nurse guided me to the room. Inside, Lawrence sat propped on the bed, his face pale, his hands still trembling from the aftermath. Tiffany lay in the next bed, her eyes swollen from crying, her body wrapped in thin blankets. She couldn't meet my gaze. "Evelyn!" Lawrence rasped, his voice hoarse. "I can explain." I raised a hand, silencing him. I placed the envelope on the table between their beds. My voice was steady, cold. "No need. The evidence explains everything." Tiffany sobbed quietly, her fingers twisting the sheet. "Please forgive me," she whispered. "I was foolish. It was a mistake." "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," I replied. "What you did was treachery." Lawrence reached toward me, desperation in his eyes. "Evelyn, don't do this. We can fix it. 40 years of marriage. 40 years I cut him off, and every one of them is ashes now." I slid 2 documents from the envelope and placed them beside his hand. Divorce papers, already prepared, already signed by me. Tiffany's sobs turned into wails. Lawrence's lips trembled, but he said nothing. For once, his clever tongue failed him. At that moment, the door opened. Isaac stepped inside, his uniform exchanged for plain clothes, his face gaunt from lack of sleep. He looked at Tiffany first, then at Lawrence, then finally at me. "Mom," he said quietly, "I brought the folder you asked for." He handed me the manila file I had hidden in the dresser at home, the backup evidence, every photograph and recording. His hand lingered as he gave it to me, his eyes full of questions he couldn't bring himself to ask. Tiffany reached for him, her voice frantic. "Isaac, please!" "Forgive me." I was confused. I didn't know what I was doing. But Isaac stepped back, his jaw tight, His voice was low, broken. You knew exactly what you were doing. He turned away, his silence sharper than any curse. I placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling his pain bleed into mine. Together, we walked out of the hospital room, leaving Lawrence and Tiffany behind in their disgrace. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. Not happy happiness was far away, but lighter, as if the burden of lies had finally shifted off my chest. The world knew the truth now. My enemies had destroyed themselves with their own greed. But as I glanced at my son beside me, his face pale, his eyes hollow, I understood that victory and loss often travel hand in hand. The scandal did not fade quickly. For weeks, whispers followed the Harris name like shadows at dusk. Neighbors crossed the street to greet me with sympathetic smiles, while others leaned together, trading the story as if it were gossip too delicious to keep. The videos had traveled far beyond our block, through town, through the web, through places I would never see. Lawrence and Tiffany had become a public cautionary tale. For me, though, the world narrowed to something simpler: my salon, my son, and the quiet ache of starting over. Isaac moved back into the house just 3 days after the hospital incident. He carried only one suitcase, his fire chief's jacket slung over his arm. His face looked older, as if years had passed in those few days. "Mom," he said, standing in the doorway, "I can't live with her. I can't even look at her. If it's all right, I'd like to stay here for a while." I hugged him, tears stinging my eyes. "Of course, this is still your home." From that moment, the house no longer felt haunted. It was no longer just the shell of my broken marriage. With Isaac under the same roof, there was warmth again, even if it was fragile. We fell into a rhythm. Each morning, I opened Harris Styles while Isaac brewed strong coffee in the kitchen. By the time I returned home in the evenings, he had tidied the house, cooked simple meals, and gone through paperwork I had neglected for months. "Mom, the Grand Hotel wants to increase their standing order," he told me one night at dinner, flipping through a contract. "They say your stylists are the best in town." I smiled faintly. They always were. I just didn't have the energy to push harder. "Then let me push with you," he said, his voice steady. And so he did. Within a month, business at the salon grew. Clients came not just for haircuts but to offer encouragement, to praise my strength. "You're an inspiration, Evelyn," one woman told me as I trimmed her bangs. "You stood up for yourself. You reminded us all that dignity matters." Those words warmed me, though they also carried a quiet sting. Strength was not born from choice but from necessity. Still, I accepted their kindness, because for the first time in years, I began to believe it myself. At home, Isaac changed too. Slowly, the hollow look left his eyes. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table eating beans and cornbread, he smiled a real smile, faint but genuine. "Mom, do you remember when you taught Tiffany how to braid hair?" I nodded, bracing for pain. "She never learned," he said, shaking his head. "But you did. You taught me how to tie knots when I was a Boy Scout. You taught me how to fix my uniform buttons. You always taught me." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. In that moment, I realized something I had forgotten. Betrayal had stolen much, but it could not erase the bond between mother and son. By early spring, we expanded the salon. Isaac helped negotiate a new lease, securing a second location in a busier district. I poured my energy into design mirrors that stretched wall to wall, chairs gleaming under golden light, fresh paint in calming hues. Clients stepped inside and gasped at the transformation. "This is more than a salon," Betty Martin declared proudly during her first visit. "It's a sanctuary." Her words echoed what I felt. Harris Styles was no longer just a business. It was proof that I could survive fire, both literal and metaphorical, and still stand. As for Lawrence and Tiffany, they faded into the shadows of their own disgrace. Lawrence signed the divorce papers without contest, his once commanding voice reduced to mutters. Tiffany tried to reach Isaac with tearful messages, but he never replied. Eventually, both disappeared from town, leaving behind only their shame. On a quiet Sunday evening, Isaac and I sat on the porch, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The air smelled of honeysuckle, and for the first time in many months, peace settled around us. "Mom," he said softly, "you saved yourself. And you saved me too." I looked at him, the boy I had raised, the man who had stood beside me through fire and betrayal. "No," I whispered. "We saved each other." The cicadas sang in the trees, steady and eternal. I leaned back, letting the fading light wash over me. The past was ashes, but ashes could nourish new soil, and from that soil we were building again, stronger, wiser, together.